even know where it's coming from.
It's coming from the speaker, so it's got to be a microphone, but I can.
Whoa.
Well, let's not do that.
It's that one.
Okay.
It's that plate in your skull that you got.
Yeah.
Let me see if one of these is giving feedback. I can just turn it down.
There's Rich. Hey, Rich.
Should I mute it?
Oh.
It should be unmuted.
Yeah,
Rick,
it's
he's talking.
unmuted. It's unmuted.
Rich, are you muted?
Yeah, he's talking.
I can't hear him.
Okay, give me 2 seconds.
Hold on. You're causing this.
The microphone's just a little high. So.
All right, well, we'll do the official part. It's 4 p.m. This special work session is called to order. We're on.
I believe so. Yes.
Okay.
Hold on 1 second. Rich, I think we're just still muted on my end. How about now, Rich?
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
How's Sarah doing?
Feeling much better.
Good.
Thank you for asking. Been a long week, but we're getting there.
I'm sure. All right, well, we've called the meeting to order and we're ready. So whenever you're ready,
Perfect.
Feel free.
Well, thank you, Mayor Todd and members of the council, and thank you for all of your support and accommodation this past week. I'm sorry I can't make this in person, but hopefully next month I'll be out in Western Maryland. I can stop up to say hi to everybody then. But today, we're going through our post-session wrap-up for the last 90 days. In typical fashion, this is going to be a little inconsistent from what we're usually having in these types of encounters. Typically, I come in with some really, unfortunate or bad news or somber news that relates to Annapolis. But, in retrospect, there's a lot of great things that came out of Annapolis this year, particularly for Allegheny County, Frostburg, and just the entire Western region. So let me start there first. I really want to kind of start with some good news, then get into some of the breakdown of the actual budget and some of the bills that we worked on this year, some of the things that may come back next year. But let's start with the good news first. The first is it's kind of hard to deny the fact that we came away with a really successful year. We walked into Annapolis with our feeling of confidence, knowing that there was a lot of support going into the 90-day session based off of the pre-session meetings that we had with our delegation members, with some of the leadership in Annapolis, certainly the governor's office, not only for specific requests for Frostburg, but also for the impacts that took place last May with the floods. It was sort of a tumultuous time, obviously, and trying to help get the support from FEMA and that whole dramatic political nuance and dance, all that kind of curtailed to what really came out to be some silver linings in the budget. So let me just talk a little bit about that first. We walked away in this 90-day budget with some really great reflective support from Annapolis. Just throw out a few numbers. We saw, in terms of the flood mitigation from last year, we were able to secure $9.45 million to help support Western Port, parts of Western Maryland, Georges Creek, with state funds to help support the communities. That's a substantial amount of money that the state put forward because they knew that DC was not providing that support. Obviously, they saw the impacts to the community and they felt compelled that we had to do this. So in a bipartisan effort, there was the funds that are going to be coming back to the communities and helping support all of that mitigation and trying to bring us back to somewhat of where we were, or hopefully in a better place than where we were last May. We also came away with $6 million in disparity grants back to Allegheny County. Now, if you look at the budget as it was presented by the governor in January, there was no money for disparity grants for Allegheny County. That was one of the concerns that we had. We saw that the governor made a compelling promise and pledge to help support related to the flooding out here in parts of Allegheny County. But in terms of annually speaking, disparity grants are something that Allegheny County and some other counties have relied on to help support their annual budgets. So the fact that we were able to lobby the General Assembly to not only put in a reinstatement of disparity grants, to make sure specifically that $6 million was coming back to the county, that's another tremendous victory that I would say we can't overlook from the efforts that we put forward this year. In addition to that, we also came into this year without any real, I wouldn't say confidence, I think, but I would say more or less, we never really received any official confirmation from Annapolis that there was going to be a continuing support towards the George Edwards Fund. As you know, this past fiscal year was the 5th and final year of the state to require a $10 million support for the Western region in that program. That commitment, certainly was something that we really pressed hard during the fall. In fact, the House Appropriations Committee came out with Delegate Heinball and others to kind of showcase what those impacts meant based off of the George Edwards program. And while, again, there was no commitment by the legislators, they certainly understood the importance of what the program has been providing, but no guarantees. So in addition to not seeing disparity grants in the budget, to not see the George Edwards Fund in the budget, we were starting at ground zero. And throughout that 90-day process, again, to see us supplement the mitigation funding, but to see us also supplement additional funds for the disparity grant, but to also come away with $9 million in the George Edwards Fund for this fiscal year is, I think, just another sort of cherry on top when you look at the aggregate of funds that are coming back to the area. When you look at it in a year where we were going into another strenuous and tumultuous fiscal situation with the budget, we were obviously having to deal with another deficit this year, which I'll get into in a minute. We're going into concerns about structural deficits in the next couple of years. So knowing all those factors in place, and to still walk away with those dollars for the George Edwards Fund, and to almost have the full commitment like we've seen in previous years, I think is just a great representation of what the leadership in Annapolis sees in the program. I would also have to say, and some of you actually had the chance to hear from Speaker Pena Melnick at the PACE reception back in January. She was very compelled from the very beginning to, make it her mission to really make sure that rural communities across the state were not overlooked. She created the new bipartisan rural caucus in her chamber. She also recognized, the commitments, the need to help support, the communities out in Western Maryland, in the rural areas of Western Maryland. So I think based off of, her commitment, her establishment of this new caucus, some of the policy initiatives that came out of that caucus this year, I think it was very much an overt intention on her part to say that, not only is the administration committed to helping support on the mitigation issues related to the floods, but in addition to that, we also recognize that parts of the western areas of Maryland need our support even more than in years past, and we're there to help fulfill that. So, a lot of compliments need to be shared by all of you, including Mayor Todd. I think in looking at the 90 days, working in tandem with Mayor Todd and the council, working with Patrick and Hayden, Lydia, all of you, plus looking at the support that we had with your partnership just to the south of you with Cumberland, the meetings that we had in Annapolis, the district nights that we had, the encounters that we had in Annapolis, alongside working in tandem with the lobby representatives representation for Allegheny County this year. I think all that further enriched our grassroots effort this year. We had a lot of synergy in our messaging, and through that unified front, I think we certainly came away with some really strong numbers in terms of operational support.
Yep.
In addition, go ahead.
No,
I'm sorry.
I was just going to echo what you said. I think the work that everybody did down there, we put a lot of miles in down there, and it really paid off.
Yes, indeed. In fact, there was one little cherry on top that I'd like to add to what Mayor Todd just said there. You know, in addition to the operational funds that we were able to secure this year, one in particular specifically for Frostburg that I want to touch on was the success in the capital budget appropriation for the water sustainability improvements. You know, we spent, as you remember, last summer, and even prior to that, for the last, I would say, almost 18 to 19 months, we had been engaging with the administration on the need for support as it relates to needed repairs and state capital support for the water sustainability improvement projects, particularly with the strain of the Lone Oconee water situation, the drought that we had, the flood, obviously, from last year. In the aggregate of all those things, you know, I think it certainly came to a pinnacle head last summer when we sat down with the Secretary of the Department of the Environment and her team. I think she really understood that there was a necessity there to help support Frostburg. When we presented our capital request to the governor in early summer, we were hoping to see at least maybe an ask of about $600,000+ to help support our needs. By the time Annapolis, was ready to reconvene in January, we received a personal call from the governor's office to say the governor is putting in his capital miscellaneous grants program $400,000 towards the city of Frostburg for those improvements. To have a dedicated capital fund appropriations in the governor's budget, in the capital budget, is really a feather in the cap for all of the effort that you all put forward over that 18 months. We walked in feeling very confident, as most people do. 99.99% of the time, if you are in the capital budget, particularly the governor's budget, there's a high likelihood and probability you're walking away with that money in tow. However, as we were drawing closer to budget decisions, we were receiving information from the governor's office literally about 3 or 4 days prior to the capital budget miscellaneous grants hearings in Annapolis, that the Department of Legislative Services was actually recommending to the capital budget subcommittee to cut that $400,000 out of the budget. Clearly, that was a shock to all of us. And immediately after getting the news, I was speaking directly with Mayor Todd, Patrick, and the team. And within 24 hours, we had our strategy in place. We were able to sit down and speak directly with committee staff, prepare ourselves for testimony, and we had the opportunity to actually hear from the capital budget subcommittee chair. He personally called us to say, even prior to the hearings that were going to be conducted on this the following week, he personally reached out to us to say, Rich, we really appreciated all of the efforts with having Mayor Todd and Mayor Morris meet with me a couple weeks ago to explain the project. Understanding the importance of that project, having the opportunity to meet with both the mayors and you, we are not going to take the recommendation by the state, and we're going to make sure that we affirm our commitment to supporting that project, and that fund will stay in the capital budget. So the efforts, as Mayor Todd said a moment ago, the efforts that we put in, not only during session, but in preparation for those hearings, really paid off. So another compliment to all of you for the efforts and the collective effort that we put forward in that one moment of shock and awe, but we were able to come away very successful. So again, walking away this year for Allegheny County, in the history of my near 8 years working with Allegheny County nonprofit organizations, and that also also includes Frostburg and Cumberland. I think this probably is going to go down as one of the more historic years in terms of support that we've seen out of Annapolis, financially speaking. And I think that's one of the things that I recommended in our report that I shared with everybody, which is while there was great success this year, we cannot slow down or be complacent. We have to stay motivated. We have to kind of continue to leave the pedal on the gas. I think through our collaboration with the delegation and our folks at the county, I think we have to maintain an aggressive partnership with all of those relationships, particularly going into a new term for a potential second term for the Moore administration and some new members that are coming in to Annapolis. It's going to be prudent upon us that they are continuing to hear from us, continuing to understand the awareness and the need for support coming from Annapolis back to Allegheny County and what it means for our communities. So in the next few weeks, as we kind of close down this quarter, I'm going to be working with all of you and Mayor Todd on what our priorities should be for next year. I think, again, there should be some alignment like we saw this past year with the county. And if we can find some, sort of high-level alignment along the specific needs for us, and we can kind of bundle that into a package that we can present to our state lawmakers and leaders way in advance, I think we have a great probability of continuing our success. Any questions on sort of the high-level good news before I kind of get into some of the details?
Nope.
Doesn't appear to be.
Okay, well then let me kind of just take a step back for a second and talk a little bit about the budget highlights. There's obviously a lot there, and then if I have some time, I'll get into some of the policy bills that we've worked on this year. Another milestone in Annapolis, typically every year the number of bills introduced by both the House and Senate chambers continues to rise. This year was no different, especially it being an election year. The Maryland General Assembly introduced nearly 3,500 individual pieces of legislation. That includes individual bills, that includes legislative bond initiatives, bond bills, and joint resolutions. So to say that we were busy doing a lot of quote-unquote light reading every day was an understatement. We looked at all 35, or I'd say specifically there were 3,473 pieces of legislation, and we looked at all of those to see if there was going to be any particular direct or indirect impacts to the city of Frostburg. I would say, confidently speaking, that there were two major topics that consumed, no pun intended, the energy in Annapolis. Obviously, the budget was one of the leading issues. Constitutionally speaking, we have to leave within 90 days a balanced budget for the year. But beyond the fiscal impact and fiscal debates that we had, no other topic consumed our attention than the issues related to the rising cost of energy. If you looked at the number of bills just introduced by Democrats and Republicans in both chambers, there was nearly 100 individual bills just on the topic of energy. And there was a lot of conjecture, obviously, as to how we could reduce the rising costs plaguing every Maryland household. I think while Maryland Republicans and Maryland Democrats maybe had some difference of opinions on how to do that, there was one universal truth where they had commonality, which was we as a legislature have to do something to help mitigate these costs. We have to find ways of reducing the burdens on our Maryland households. And so through the introduction of those bills, there was one bill that really was sort of the mechanism that became the driving force, which was essentially the omnibus energy bill of the year, and that was the Speaker's Utility Relief Act legislation. I'm going to talk about that in 1 second, but let me just hop back a little bit on issue number one, which is the budget. I'm going to give you a few just general highlights. Some of these general highlights, though, are in your report, so it may seem a little redundant if you had a chance to read it through, but if not, let me just give you a quick sort of high level on some of these numbers that are in the budget for this year. Going into session, our DLS analysts projected that we were going to have a $1.5 billion gap between projected revenues and expected spending for the upcoming FY27 fiscal year. The budget bill introduced by Governor Moore back in January proposed a almost nearly $71 billion plan to erase that gap. The budget this year includes no tax increases. Unlike last year, we saw a $1.4 billion increase in taxes and fees. This budget does not do that. Instead, we saw what was essentially fund swapping, where certain programs in state government were basically utilized as ways to sort of plug the breaching gaps of our deficit and to help sort of provide a balanced budget without it impeding on Maryland taxpayers. One in particular program where a lot of the funds were rated to help balance and mitigate the budget was called the Strategic Energy Fund, called SEAF. Of that SEAF fund, there was nearly $282 million diverted. That is going directly to help close the budget gaps, the shortfalls in our FY27 budget. In addition to that, the SEAF fund was also rated of over $100 million to pay down the energy program called Empower. That Empower program has a surcharge on every ratepayer's bill every month. The $100 million is going to help reduce those surcharges that are on all of our electric bills every month. And according to the leadership of the administration and the leadership in both chambers, they believe that in order to reduce those surcharges, it will ultimately save about an annual $150 on utility savings for homeowners over the next year. That breaks it down to about $12 to $15 per month. There's also some other highlights I do want to mention as well that I think are important. The budget leaves about $250 million in a cash surplus for the end of this year, which is great. In addition to that, we're seeing about $2.2 billion, which is about 8% of general fund revenues. This is also good news because typically the budget committees, when they present their recommendations for the General Assembly, typically we want to see, the rainy day fund at least at a 5% of funds in that rainy day fund. The fact that we have exceeded that to, be about 8% is good news. However, while there's some good things that came out of the budget in terms of a balanced budget, there's no taxes or fees this year, there is still a looming storm ahead of us. The governor has been boasting about, the surplus, the fact we had a balanced budget. But if you've been reading the Sun paper and a few other papers, and just looking at the Department of Legislative Services budget analysis, there is still a looming and very precarious future ahead of us in terms of the state funds and the state budget. Looking at next term, the DLS analysts have projected that the General Assembly and the governor really have to roll up their sleeves because they are going to be dealing with a $2.3 billion shortfall. And that gap actually widens to about $3 billion by 2029. And by 2031, that gap is projected to be about $4 billion. So to say that we have a lot of tough decisions ahead of us, we've been kind of talking about this obviously for the last couple of overviews that I've presented, but we are at now a pivotal crossroads on how do we now deal with this issue. And a lot of this remains in terms of why we're in this budget gap, rests on certain overspending attributed to our record funds that we are putting towards public education. That's the blueprint requirement of a $40 billion investment in public education. There's higher expectations in terms of Medicaid costs that we have to fulfill, and there's also been a growing demand on the state's child care subsidy program. So when you kind of in the aggregate bring all that stuff together, you're kind of seeing what we are from a financial situation. In addition to those concerns, you probably haven't forgotten or haven't overlooked the other potential issue that has not also been baked into the concerns for where this budget gap could actually be even more exacerbated, which is dealing with the potential lawsuits related to the legislation that passed a few years ago called the Child Victims Act. If you remember when that bill passed about 3 years ago, it lifted the 20-year statute of limitations for both public and private entities accused of sexual abuse, essentially giving more opportunities for victims to come forward to file claims against the state. Now, under the analysis that we received back in December, if all of the current suits that have been filed against the state under the current law were settled for the maximum amount, the state could be facing a bill of almost $10.7 billion. So in addition to all the other costs I just talked about, there's also the possibility that we're looking at another $10 billion added on to our deficit based off of the passage of the bill from a couple of years ago. So again, kind of make this sort of sobering moment, when we look at next year, and in our conversations, throughout the interim with the administration, whatever our asks are for the state, clearly these are going to be questions that come up in the back of their mind in terms of, we understand your asks, but we're also dealing with this budget, deficit. How can we juggle all these needs? So it's going to be important on us to look at what our priorities are going to be. Maybe, hopefully, again, as we saw this year, somewhat be succinct on what the county is looking for so that we can come away with a unified ask and seeing those dollars come back to benefit not just Frostburg, but the collective region. So again, we'll talk more about that in the next few weeks, but that is where we are in terms of a more telling future for our fiscal situation in Annapolis. There is still a commitment, as I said before. This budget does provide a commitment towards public education. There are funds dedicated into our reserves, as I mentioned a moment ago. The George Edwards Fund, as I mentioned before, is seeing $9 million, which is great. There's obviously some funds that are going towards economic growth initiatives, child care, credential programs, things like that. All in all, very good things. But the question is going to dig into, are these programs going to survive, or are they going to be in a situation where there's going to be dramatic cuts for next year? Because going into a new year, a new term, going into the fiscal situation we are in, and knowing just 1 year ago we saw these tax increases, are we going to straddle or burden our taxpayers with more of a responsibility to cover our needs? So the question will be more taxes or fees and or potential programmatic cuts. So more to be discussed obviously in the year to come. The blueprint, as you know, is going to be receiving more funds in our general fund obligations. So that's just going to also put more pressure on how we balance our budget and what priorities are going to be in the next couple of years in terms of what our needs are across all the agencies. So again, there's going to be a lot of hard questions over the interim by the administration as they prepare for the budget for next year. And certainly the General Assembly is going to have a lot of work ahead of them next year as to what ways they can find creatively to generate new revenue that's not going to be about programmatic cuts or new taxes. Any questions on some of the budget highlights?
I'm kind of afraid to ask questions after all.
Well, like I said, it's as I put in the report, I think the General Assembly came away with a very fortunate year, in my opinion, where they were able to balance a budget without putting an additional strain on taxpayers with new taxes by going into the C fund and kind of rating that fund almost as a one-time plug to help balance everything out. But unfortunately, that's not going to be sustainable. You can't drop here to pay Paul. It's not sustainable. So eventually, what is going to be a pivotal crossroads, I think we're there. And that is, okay, if we're not going to be looking at raiding other pockets of funds, dedicated funds for programs, we can't put any more on the backs of our taxpayers. We don't want to see programs like DDA cut even more than they already have. So what do we do? And, obviously, as I said to you in the last couple of years, there was discussions in Annapolis about maybe expanding gaming beyond what currently exists. I'm sure that's going to be a conversation that comes back next year. But beyond that, I don't know right now if there's any other, substantial means of generating revenue. And, unfortunately, in my opinion, Maryland has not been a pro-business state, to say the least. So unless there's a philosophical change in terms of providing new ways to help incentivize business to come to Maryland, I think it's going to be really the next couple of years strenuous on the state and the state budget. Because I also don't foresee the next at least few more years under the Trump administration, I don't see us having additional funds coming back from the feds to help generate or stimulate our state government or our state economy. So in a lot of ways, Maryland's kind of left out going, okay, we cannot rely on the federal government like we've had in the past. We cannot continue to rely on the backs of the taxpayers. And we're also not considered a very pro-business state. So what do? They certainly don't have a lot of options. So they're going to have to get very creative over the next year. Let me turn my attention, if there's no questions on the budget, let me just turn my attention a little bit to the second biggest issue, or the leading biggest issue this year, as it relates to the Energy Relief Act, which is also called the Maryland's Utility Relief Package. Again, this is the bill that was originated by the new Speaker of the House, and it was supposed to be a continuation of last year's Next Generation Act. But in the weeks following the initial presentation of that bill, the bill really took on a whole new life. And, there were words used as omnibus or Frankenstein, to kind of describe the bill in its final iteration. In a lot of ways, that really is what it is, literally. It is a collective of about 10 to 11 individual bills or legislative concepts that were introduced this year that were actually just then sort of merged into this final bill. And there were a variety of things in the legislation that passed, ultimately with the point of this bill is going to help shape policy for energy in Maryland for the indefinite future, but more importantly, this passage of this bill is going to help reduce the overall cost on our ratepayers over the next year. I mean, that was ultimately what this bill was packaged to become. There was bipartisan support in the House and in the Senate, minimal, by Republicans on the bill. There was substantial debate throughout this entire bill process, and there were numerous amendments that were adopted or proposed in the weeks leading up to the end of session. By the end of the 90-day session, and by the end, when the reprint was finally presented and is online, the bill totals to be about 245 pages. So when they say it's an omnibus bill, it literally is an understatement. I mean, I haven't seen a state bill that big in a very long time, if or at all. So within that 245 pages of this bill, if you look at our end of session report, I summarize it into about, I'd say 7 pages. And even with 7 pages, at a very high level, I don't really think does a lot of justice to what this bill does. I don't want to get too granular about it because it's so complex. It can be very technical, particularly around energy. So I don't want to, see a lot of eyes glazing on the video here. But take a look at what is in the report. And if there's anything specifically in here that you find of interest, I'm happy to take the conversation offline. But there is one section of the bill that I know is going to require some time with all of you and with Patrick and certainly with the mayor. If you have your report open, or if you had a chance to glance at it, or if you have it with you now, if you look at page 10 of the report, section O, called residential solar permitting, is an area that requires some additional deep dive on the part of us later on this year. According to this part of the bill, it's requiring both county and municipal governments to process residential permitting. And there's also a requirement for municipal governments to actually do inspections on residential solar energy and energy storage systems. So there is not only a requirement for counties and municipal government to do this work, but inside the actual final legislation, there is a specific mandate that by August of 2027, municipal governments and county governments must institute a brand new solar permitting software platform. And that solar software platform has to do a variety of things. It has to provide essentially an opportunity to help support tracking of those applications, application submissions, and approval of residential building permits as it relates to these solar energy and energy storage systems on residential properties. It's very specific and very technical on what the language of the law is asking for and what this IT platform is required to do. But it must be done according to the law. Well, it will be law when the governor signs it. But essentially, what I would like to task myself is talking with all of us offline is that if a municipality such as Frostburg or other smaller municipalities cannot build this out internally, if we don't have IT resources to conduct this and create this platform, there's obviously going to be some even county jurisdictions that are going to have to look outside and outsource to a third-party vendor to do this work. If that is the case for the city of Frostburg, we represent a company that does licensing and permitting, regulatory and records management. They have contracts across the country, including the state of Maryland. So if it's something where the city needs the support of an outside third party to help do this work, we would gladly help put you in touch with them. They can provide an actual demonstration of their capabilities and how they can actually comply with what the state law is requiring under their platform. So we can talk more about that again offline, but that is one specific area that I thought was something I wanted to raise because it was having a direct impact to all of municipal governments across the state.
Do you know what the purpose of requiring this software is?
What's the purpose of it?
Yeah.
I think the purpose behind the actual IT platform, that the software platform that the state's asking county and municipal governments to do, is that if we're going to see more proliferation of these residential solar systems being utilized by residents, there's going to have to be a need to inspect those storage systems by either county or municipal agencies. And in order for there to be compliance, in order for there to be inspections, there's got to be some type of record keeping in place in order for both county and municipal governments to know which residential properties have these systems and energy storage systems on their properties for various reasons. So for the state, they said, I think the most logical thing we can do is let's put in, language what this platform must successfully do to help support our local and municipal governments understand how they need to, record, how they can, provide the tracking, and help just further assist in the overall process for, permitting and inspecting. So it was more of in I think their minds, we just cannot leave it uncodified. We have to give the counties and municipal governments some direction on what the state is requiring for these permitting, inspection, processes. They have to put some type of real context behind what they're asking for. And certainly for residents, they also need some understanding, some guidance on what requires of them. So I think it was more or less a technical need for it to be defined so that there weren't going to be additional questions. And I also think there was an intent where the state didn't want to have counties and municipal governments across the state just coming up with their own platforms necessarily, or their own inspection process. I think they wanted to bring some uniformity together, so it wasn't just sort of a Wild West guess on what is considered to be compliant with the law.
So if we already do our own inspections and we keep track of, solar installations, if we just look at our system and see whether or not it complies with what this law requires, would we be safe, or do we have to buy some platform?
Yeah, that's a great question, Regina. So there are specific parts of the bill that specify what is required for the system and the tracking system. And for, let's say, hypothetically, the city of Frostburg, the language basically says that municipalities must implement this solar permitting, and there must be specific features supporting the applications, the tracking, and the residential building permits. And it must include specifics in there. And I would say that there's probably about 2 or 3 pages on those requirements, unless those requirements are things that the city of Frostburg can meet already through your existing platform or through your existing practices. Unless those are mirroring tailored to what the state law is going to be enacted, then City of Frostburg is going to have to make modifications and changes to meet the new law.
Yeah, something to look into.
Yeah. And like I said, what I'll do, I think will be important, because I need to do this for the city of Cumberland. I plan on probably coming back out in the next couple of weeks. I think what I'll do is I will pull out in preparation for maybe some face-to-face meeting with everybody next month. I will pull up the specific language in the bill that talks about this solar permitting software and the requirements related around inspection, in-person or virtual inspections. I will bundle all that language together so that you all can look at it and discuss it internally and to see if this is something that already pre-exists with your own protocols and systems, or if it's something where you do ultimately have to explore maybe an outside third party to do it.
Okay.
It may be something we can add the requirements to our current permitting software,
Yeah.
or we may need something a little bit more extensive.
Yeah. Yeah, we'd appreciate seeing the language in that bill.
Yeah, like I said, if you
Well, that section, I
I
mean.
was gonna say, forget the romance novels over the weekends. Just pull up the 245-page bill and just go to
I just
town.
meant
It
that
is
section.
extensive, but yes, I'll make sure to get all that to you before I come up to see you all. There was also, again, of the 3,500 bills that we were looking through, there were certainly some bills that I highlighted in our end of session report that were very important and relevant to us, because these are some of the bills that we worked on directly in Annapolis. The first one that really kind of was introduced early on was this Legionnaire bill, this Legionnaire water bill that was introduced as House Bill 204. This was going to be basically setting requirements on building owners and water suppliers to detect certain disinfectant residential levels on public water systems. When this bill was introduced, Hayden, Patrick, myself, and Bobby Smith from Cumberland, we really immediately jumped on the bill because there were some initial concerns in the original draft of the language. We had met with the lobbyists that were basically overseeing and representing this national organization, an association that was trying to bring a bill that would be modeled in other states that they've gone through to kind of help combat Legionnaire disease. We had great conversations in those early weeks of session, We even provided some substantial changes and edits to the bill. A lot of them, through our conversations, were adopted, and a lot of the suggestions were actually conceded by the proponents of the bill. While we saw some success in our conversations, the bill didn't even really make it past the bill hearing. So any of the amendments that we were going to be trying to, add into a final product really became moot because it became very clear by the middle of March that this bill just was not ready to move forward. I think based off the testimony by both opponents and proponents, and clearly the need that there were other stakeholders that were also expressing similar concerns, similar to ours. I think there was just not enough time for the proponents to kind of provide back to the committee a bill that was workable in time for something to pass. And this was the first year that they were introducing it, so I think the proponents more than likely are going to come back next year. I think the Legionnaire Alliance has good intentions, but clearly I think for them, if they're going to see any success, they're going to have to maybe put together a informal work group of stakeholders, including legislators, over the interim, to work out something that is more sound before they introduce something next year. And we'll see how it goes. Clearly, if the lobbyists decide that their client wants to see something reintroduced next year, we will reach out and see if we can be part of those discussions. Because I certainly feel like this bill, similar to the next bill I'm going to talk about, I think the impact of our efforts and our experience and just our expertise really played into a lot of the final versions of the provisions of the law. So I think if the lobbyists were smart, they would probably reach back out to us again if necessary, so they can have a more workable product in preparation for next session. Another bill that we have been working on, as I said, that really we immersed ourselves in last year was the sewage sludge PFAS legislation. This bill was reintroduced this year. This bill basically is establishing restrictions related to land application of sewage sludge and basically the amount of total concentration of regulated PFAS that's going to be applied on fields. This is a bill that when we saw this introduced last year, we had a lot of heartburn about it. And both Frostburg and Cumberland came to the table. We testified before the committees, expressing our concerns about the problems the bill had. And even towards the end of last year, the sponsor on the Senate side was really, I would say headstrong, trying to get something passed. But the time ran out, and fortunately, the sponsor took our suggestion, which was, if we want to see a more workable product, and we want to see something that's going to function where there's a pragmatic approach, take the time over the interim to bring back not just the proponents of the bill, but bring back the people like us to the table, and we can provide some sound recommendations that could be considered, and maybe we can work with the proponents to find ways that we can find a more mitigated approach, find a middle ground where all of us can find some commonality. And fortunately, they took our recommendation. They established a variety of work groups, and through those stakeholder conversations, both Frostburg and Cumberland were on those meetings. And throughout the 8 months that we had before leading into session, when the bill was reintroduced this year, a lot of the concerns that we expressed in last year's testimony and through those work groups was stuff that we felt very satisfied met our needs and our voice. A lot of the concerns were actually addressed in the final bill, and by the time the bill was actually formally reintroduced this year, it was very comforting to hear from Hayden and from Bobby saying, the bill is actually in a much better posture than it was last year. We came into it just monitoring the bill. The bill eventually passed and is going to be signed into law. Actually, I think it was signed into law this past week. So some success, even though we didn't do anything on the bill this year. I think a lot of the work was reflected in the interim, and the overall product came out to be what we were hoping to see. So a lot of kudos to the efforts by Hayden and Bobby from Cumberland to see those those changes happen. Another bill that we actually supported and we're at the table on this year was the Rural Readiness Program. This was a bill that was established under the new House Rural Caucus. As I mentioned earlier in my overview, the Speaker of the House created this new bipartisan caucus to help support rural communities across the state. And under this bill, it basically is establishing a new grant that's created through the Rural Maryland Council. It's providing competitive grants to up to about $50,000 for eligible applicants, including municipalities and local governments in rural communities. We obviously saw this as a great benefit to the city of Frostburg, and we came in testifying in support of the bill alongside RMC. And I'm happy to say that through our efforts, the bipartisan bill, both the House and Senate version, passed, and now we are just waiting for the governor to sign it. When the bill is eventually signed into law and the funds are appropriated, and when the council is ready to provide these competitive grant opportunities, I would strongly recommend for the city of Frostburg to consider looking at the possibility of applying for some of those grants. Again, it's only up to about $50,000 per eligible applicant, but $50,000 is better than nothing. So I look at it as we're going to have to be looking at every potential state or local grant program available, and if we can find eligibility to qualify for some of these, I would say look into applying, because I think we're going to be needing every dollar we can beyond our lobbying efforts in Annapolis. There's a few other bills that we were tracking. Obviously, there was very late in session, a senator from Harford County was putting in a bill to create a new work group to study our laws on electric bicycles. I know the city of Cumberland has been having some issues about this. I see here in Annapolis, I think it's sort of becoming a more growing concern, not just in rural areas, but I think in most suburbs and urban suburb type of hybrid communities, where more of these electric bikes are proliferating our sidewalks and streets. And so the idea was to establish this work group, and we came in supporting the bill. I think, unfortunately, while the bill was considered, to be something that was going to be constructive, and I think there was a lot of, support by the establishment of the work group, I think in this circumstance, because the bill was introduced so late in session, it just ran out of time. So in speaking with the sponsor, my feeling was that if the bill was not going to make it past the finish line this year, that ultimately it was going to be reintroduced next year. And if it does, I think the sponsors would like to see us back at the table, and we'll see where it goes.
Is there any chance that MML is going to consider supporting that as an organization?
So that's a great question, Mayor Todd. Because if you remember, MML actually brought it to our attention late in the game. I would imagine, since there's been conversations that we've had prior to the session for Cumberland and municipalities and areas in Ocean City dealing with this, I would imagine MML is going to have to take a look at it and maybe even take a potential serious either glance or maybe even supporting the bill, knowing that it's going to be positively impacting the membership across the state. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, memory serves me correctly, the MML conference is coming up in mid-June.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is going to be one of the things on their program, but while we're in Ocean City, probably worth the opportunity to open that conversation up with Mayor Meehan and some of the other mayors and some of the folks on MML staff to say, that work study group was going to be looking at electric bikes. Is MML going to be taking a position next year if it comes back to Annapolis?
There's
And
always,
see what happens, see what they say.
there's always a session on legislative priorities, and they do ask for suggestions from the floor, so that would be something we could bring up then.
I think that would be another wise avenue for, maybe some of the members of ML to bring this up to ML to say, look, in addition to looking at ways of raising, local revenue to help support our needs, we have to look beyond just, raising revenue, and certainly public safety is one of those. This would be, I think, a prime candidate for MML to really, get behind. Speaking of public safety, there was a bill that Senator McKay had introduced early on, but was withdrawn right before the hearing. This was the speed monitoring system on tractor trailers on Interstate 68. We were going in to testify in support of the bill to represent the city of Cumberland, but also for the interests outside of Cumberland. I've not had a chance to talk to Senator McKay at this point, but he told me that the reason for the bill being withdrawn was because the state was actually going to take on measures to help mitigate the concerns related to the speeding of the tractor trailers. I'm not sure if you've had any, issues with the speeding on 68, on I-68, but I know for Cumberland it's been a serious issue. If this is something that the city of Frostburg wants me to pursue, or at least get back to you, I'm happy to do that. I'm already, going to be reaching out to, the senator in the next few weeks to find out what progress has been made on behalf of Cumberland. I'm happy to share those updates when I get them from him.
Yeah, I think we would probably just take a position of supporting whatever either Cumberland does or the senator does. 68 doesn't run through the city limits of Frostburg, so it's not something we really pay attention to.
But sometimes
But-
our emergency vehicles do have to answer
Yeah,
those
I would
calls,
say
but
at least once a week, the fire department responds to an incident on 68, usually for
Right.
trucks coming down from Garrett County, and they bypass the scale house and their brakes catch fire, something like that. So we would be interested in that.
Also, if a tractor trailer carrying hazardous material
Yeah.
wrecked somewhere
Sure.
between there, it's
Yeah.
going to blow right into Frostburg.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, then let me note that down. So, like I said, I'm planning to be out there the first week of June, so I'll make sure to get back with everybody once I've had a chance to talk with his office.
Okay.
There's another few bills. Let me just kind of quickly go, so I feel like I've almost been a full hour of your time. But there are a few other ones that I think are important for us to keep on our radar, because this could be a bill that we could see next year again. There were, the last 2 years, some bills related to minimizing authority and enforcement of vagrancy in municipalities. There was a bill that was introduced by a Prince George's County senator this year. It was Senate Bill 463. Essentially, the bill would repeal the authority of a municipality to prohibit vagrancy. And as all of you know, current law, a municipality may prohibit vagrancy and certain, other, misconduct inside their limits, their city limits. This bill would have literally repealed that authority to prohibit, vagrancy. And I know for, specifically Cumberland, where they've been dealing with, blighted properties and trying to revive some of the urban areas of downtown, much to, I think, everyone's chagrin, this bill was, something where municipalities were somewhat bemused as to why the state would prohibit or put handcuffs on municipalities to enforce such, issues, because they're trying to bring people back in to the cities, trying to bring people to live in the downtown areas, to revive economic development, provide opportunities for safety for citizens and tourists. So it was just a really a head scratcher as to how this bill, was introduced, but more importantly, how it even came out of the Senate Judiciary Proceedings Committee. It was somewhat of a shock, but to our surprise and mutual delight by both Republicans and Democrats, the bill was basically special ordered until the last day of session, and it ultimately failed. So happy to see that there was some common sense by the Senate after the committee decided to move it favorably. My hope is that, given the fact that it was special ordered so many times by Democratic leaders in the Senate, I'm hoping the sponsor understands that this is not a bill that the Senate chamber or Annapolis wants, nor does MML or municipalities want to see happen. So
What does
I'm
special order
hoping-
mean?
Yes.
What do you mean by special order?
So special order basically is the bill had passed out of committee favorably and was going before the body, the legislative body, the chamber, the Senate chamber, for the next stage in the progression of the bill. Whether or not the bill was going to move forward on second reader to pass out of the chamber eventually, or if the bill was going to see some amendments that were going to be taken up on third reader. Basically, that's the process of how a bill moves forward. You have first reader, goes to committee, the committee makes a decision to move it favorably or unfavorably out of the committee. If it moves favorably out of committee, it goes back to the Senate chamber, where it's going to be heard on second reader, and then if it passes on second reader, we have third and final reader, where then eventually then it goes to the opposite chamber for consideration.
Right.
That's the process. So in order for a bill that has come out favorably of a committee, but the legislative body, the chamber, does not like the bill, or certain members of the bill want to stall the progression of the bill moving forward, they special order a bill. They make a motion on the floor asking for the bill to be either special ordered or laid over for additional amendments or consideration, or even maybe a recommitment back to the original committee who heard the bill. Essentially, it's a stall tactic. It's a way to either stall the bill from moving forward, or potentially put enough effort in place to add additional questions to the viability or the need for the bill, or potentially create amendments to the bill to dilute its overall intent. So it's a tactic basically to make some substantial or even subtle changes to the initial version that came out of the committee.
Thank you.
Sure. So we'll, fingers crossed, we'll see that this bill does not have any more life in it as of this year, but time will tell for next year. There was a few other bills that I wanted to bring up. Obviously, we mentioned about MML. They only had one priority this year. That bill was House Bill 1142. This was the establishment of the task force to modernize county and municipal revenue structures. The bill made it through, and it passed with the support by both the House and Senate. We're waiting for the governor to sign it into law. Once it's signed into law, it will take effect on July 1st, but it will have a sunset, so it'll be sunsetting. The task force will finish up their work by June of next year. I'll be curious, and I think this is a conversation which is really ripe for the MML conference, knowing that the bill is probably going to be signed either next week or at the end of May. We're going into the conference mid-June. I'll be very curious to hear from some of the folks on MML staff, about the task force itself. Who are they considering?
That's what I was just going to ask. Does the bill specify who is on the task force? Does it say X number of members, MML gets to pick them, the legislature gets to pick them, whomever?
Yeah, so the bill, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the report, if I didn't do this, if I didn't hyperlink the bills, they are part of the bill report. But essentially, yes, if you look at, if you go to the MGA website, the bill is only 3 pages, and it does provide, a breakdown of who's on there. You're going to have appointments by the Senate, appointments by the House. You'll have a designee from the Comptroller's office, someone from the Secretary of DBM. There's going to be representatives. There's going to be at least 2 representatives from MML. There'll be 2 representatives from NACO. And then there's going to be a few additional other reps to be part of the overall task force. So I think it's a nice hybrid of state representatives, and then you'll have some representatives from both local associations for Banco and MML. The question is who are going to be designated, on that from MML. So I'd be curious to see if they have anyone in mind.
Okay.
Just a few other quick bills that I wanted to highlight as well. In addition to some of the more state-impacted discussions related to energy, there were certainly some national, issues that came into the debate related to ICE, agency, ICE officers cooperating with our local sheriff's departments and local law enforcement. There were some, certainly highlighted debates and some bills that passed at the very end of session that caused a lot of contention. But there were also still a few other bills that were impacting both county and municipal governments as it relates to voting. And I think one in particular bill, which was an emergency bill that passed very late in session. This was the Voting Rights Act legislation of 2026. It was one of those bills that was sort of sleeping, as I call it, where it was gaining a little bit of traction, but kind of was very, almost hibernating for a few weeks towards the latter part of session. And all of a sudden it kind of just, went right through at the end. And while it went right through, there was still a lot of debate on the bill. Essentially, I broke it down for you in your report. But if you look at it, essentially this bill, just kind of, deduce it into a few sentences. It basically says that under this new emergency bill, it establishes basically specific prohibitions against any type of hindrance or impairment of a protected class member. That could be a protected class member of race, color, or a minority group. Basically, it's prohibiting local governments from prohibiting any type of impairment of those protected class members to be elected as candidates of their choice in elections, either in a county or a municipal or municipal elections. And if there's any type of impairment that is considered against those protected class members, the bill will now authorize the office of the AG, the Attorney General, or any person to bring an action against that county or municipal government where they believe that there was some type of alleged violation. And while that, before that were to happen, there's specific language in the bill that provides the courts authority to order certain remedies or even grant preliminary relief. It was a very surprising bill that, like I said, was out there, was not moving until the very end of the session, and when it did, it caused a lot of conjecture and debate. Both MACO and MML came in very strongly against the bill. In fact, I even extrapolated in the report, as you'll see, specific quotes from their written testimony. I think MML came out with some of the strongest language compared to MACO. Essentially, one of the comments that MML said, this bill is an overreach of state power, and it essentially gives courts and the AG significant influence over local elections. I think the question will be, while the bill has been signed into law by the governor, the question will be whether or not, if there is a challenge, whether or not a local or county government will challenge the law in court for constitutional reasons. I think, in my opinion, given the recent Supreme Court decisions, there could be a possibility where a bill like this could be challenged and might even be considered, an overreach, as MML stated in their testimony.
So let me ask a question, and forgive me if this sounds naive, but there has to be, I either missed something in the explanation of this, or there has to be something else that we haven't talked about yet, because the way you explained it, or the way I understood it, I should say, it establishes specific prohibition against the impairment of the ability of members of a protected class to participate in an election. So I said, the way I understand that would be to prohibit someone from a protected class, for example, a racial minority group or something, from either fielding candidates for office or from participating in an election in some way.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where there's opposition to that, and unless there's something else that's a part of the bill that I don't understand. But I also think, like, didn't we take care of that in 1960, whatever?
Right.
Is it duplicative?
Yeah, I think there's again, that would be, in my opinion, an argument. I think there was a lot of that debated on the floors, saying, we have current laws and current case law that have already been established to make sure that there are fair and equitable elections across both state and local governments, to make sure that all races, all creeds, all protected classes have a right to not only vote but to, put up a candidate of their choosing and have fair elections.
And I would be curious also to know, I would just be curious to know, maybe there is and I don't know, and I don't know about it, but if there is an example of this having happened that spurred the creation of this bill, or if this is purely
Signaling.
virtue signaling, trying to relive the civil rights era. If there is an example of something, I would be very curious to know what it is. I'm not asking you to provide that for me. I just would be curious to know that.
It
Or
could
if
be,
this
it
is
could
just
be a way of
symbolic.
signaling opposition to the Supreme Court's, though this happened before
Yeah,
the
this was-
decision, but they probably
I
had
mean, I
an
guess.
inkling that
I
it was going
guess.
to happen that way.
I guess.
I think it was reactionary for some things happening on like the national level,
Yeah.
and making sure that if something were to happen in our area, that the state could step in, but
Yeah, that
whether they
would
should
be
be able to
nice.
step in, before they wouldn't be able to.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was a quick decision.
Okay. Anyway.
I mean, you saw, again, I didn't put a lot into the report because I wanted to concentrate strictly on a lot more of the state and local specific bills.
Oh, sure.
But there clearly was, beyond just the budget issue, and clearly there was issues related to energy, but peppered into this year, there were national debates that were brought to Annapolis. And as I said a moment ago, affordable housing, the issues are around, ICE cooperations and agreements with, local sheriff and local, police authorities. That was a hugely contested in Annapolis. A lot of debate about that. And a bill like this, I think, to what Patrick was saying, I think it was a residual from what we're seeing on the national temperature based off of the current administration in the White House. I mean, there's a lot of that playing into some of the bills that were passed in Annapolis this year.
I think one of the first bills passed was the mask bill, correct?
Yes, correct.
That was pretty much directly in response to some of the stuff happening with ICE.
Correct. I mean, if you look also, I put it in the report, but I didn't want to, get marred down too much into it. But there was a specific section in our budget this year, which essentially said that it restrict up to $124 million in state aid to local law enforcement units, so that basically that money is restricted until they can certify that they are no longer working with ICE and immigration efforts. And that was strictly because of, again, the national reaction of what's going on.
Whatever. I am just curious again that if my main concern with this is this going to put an unnecessary burden on us as a municipality to demonstrate that we're adhering to something that we were already doing anyway before this law was passed, right? To demonstrate
Yep.
that we're adhering, that we are protecting civil liberties and rights for all citizens and groups of people and whatever, that this is going to put an undue burden on a municipality for something we were already doing anyway. That's just my concern.
I think that was reflected, I think I can put that specifically in the report based off of what NACO said. There was a quote that I put in the report that basically says just that there, Todd, where they say, counties support fair elections, and they are complying with existing federal and state law. So, yeah, I think this just is a sort of duplicative of something that I think uniformly, ubiquitously, every county and municipal jurisdiction in Maryland is already doing.
Okay.
I think, though, it just opens up, a lot of concerns that now, if there is, an election, and let's say potentially a group is dissatisfied with the outcomes, they now have a potential vehicle to go to either the courts, or the AG can then take up a case and file potentially a suit against that local jurisdiction or local county. And then the counties are then now having to fight that challenge in court. So I think that's where this bill expands on that. It's giving a little bit more teeth to potentially disenfranchise, quote, protected class, members to feel like if they weren't satisfied with the outcomes, they now have maybe an additional authoritarian reach to make changes based upon the outcomes through, taking it to the courts.
Okay.
Which costs us time and money even if we're
Right.
right the whole time.
All right.
Correct.
Let's end on some good news.
So again, the good news, I kind of start with the good news, but I'll reiterate it. The good news is, putting aside some of the national, debates, the bills that we came in to support had moved forward, or some of the bills that we monitored but were involved in from last year, those bills move forward with our input intact and in place. Some of the bad bills that we didn't want to see pass, stayed in the drawer, which is good news from a policy standpoint. And again, the most important thing is we came away with $400,000 specifically for Frostburg for the capital needs, and we came away with the support and the collective efforts by everybody, substantial funds coming back to the region in the form of the flood mitigation, the disparity grants, and also the George Edwards Fund. I can't think of another single year or session where I've seen that much success for one particular client or clients. This is almost sort of like one of those moments where you kind of do the golf clap with a standing ovation, because you all should be very happy with the outcomes this year.
We are.
Yeah.
We certainly are.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
So I'll just, like I said, I'll end on the fact that we have some work ahead of us. Obviously, I will see all of you in about 4 weeks. I'll pull up that language in the Utility Relief Act so we can have a further debate and conversation about it. And then we can start kind of strategizing what our outlooks are for next year, so we can start preparing those communications and taking them down back to Annapolis. And I'll just close by saying it was a pleasure working with all of you. It was a lot of hard-fought efforts in Annapolis, but the ends justify the means, and I think we came away with some really great victories.
I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for all your work on this.
Yeah.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
All right.
Thank you, folks, for your time, and I'm sorry for going over for about 15 minutes, but there was a lot there to talk about.
Yeah.
A lot of great questions, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any other additional questions on the report.
All right. Have a nice night, Rich.
Yeah.
See you in a few
Thank
weeks.
you all. Take care.
All right. Commissioner Forsyth, anything else?
No.
Commissioner Grove, anything else?
No.
Anything else? Time is 5:18. Meeting's adjourned.